This is Dateline, news and conversation.
I'm Costas Isichos from Greece.
I'm Hendrik from Norway.
I'm Bruce Gagnon from Brunswick, Maine, in the United States.
And I'm Regis Tremblay from Yalta, the Crimea in the Russian Federation. Tonight, we're going to focus on the historic summit between President Xi and President Putin. But first, this story reported on RT Today. This was the headline: Putin names the country behind Nord Stream blast. And in it, he's quoted as saying, "I fully agree with Cy Hirsch's conclusions." Costas, I'm going to start with you first. What is your impression about Russia now in the person of the president coming out very clearly and saying the United States did it?
Well, it's in very, very important news around the world, and I don't know if this news will be on the front page of Western newspapers. Of course not, unfortunately, because the sanctions on the media coming from Russia in the West, Greece included, and the European Union countries is very, very harsh and very strict. But as you say, President Putin not only names the country, but he relies on the most credible information by an American journalist who has won the Pulitzer Prize, Mr. Seymour Hersh. And this is a very brave person, I must say, because he has put out something that we all knew, we all talked about in our personal, around the table with friends or coffees or whatever. But this is important news because Cy Hirsch's news story has not been denied by the United States government. Nobody has denied what he has written. So President Putin has come out as a head of a state, of the Russian Federation. And now the ball is in the United States court. And I don't know what they're going to say. They have to say something. And if they don't say anything, they will be explicitly admitting they did it, and they have to account for it. If they do say something, it has to be the truth. If they do lie again, as they did before, people will know. So this is a lose-lose situation for Washington, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you for that, Kostas. Hendrik, your thoughts on this incredible statement by President Putin?
It only shows that President Putin is a smart man. And of course, he knows much more as he can say, I think. The problem is that, as Costa already said, that our mainstream media in the West will not tell this story. They will not tell that President Putin agrees with Seymour Hersh. They will say, okay, RT is a propaganda channel and all this kind of stuff. We already have in our Norwegian newspapers some stories from where they interviewed some hobby divers, and they say that is no problem to dive down 70 meters and mount some bombs on this pipeline. So we have all this propaganda going on. And I don't think that the Norwegian media will tell anything about that President Putin agrees with Seymour Hersh and really points out who is behind this. And as you know, Norway is more or less included in this story. So Norwegian media, I think, don't will tell anything about that.
Thank you, Hendrik. Bruce, you're sitting over there in the United States. What do people know there about it? And is anything at all coming out to either deny or report this story?
Well, Seymour Hersh is a very respected reporter in this country and around the world. So, the alternative media is spreading the story. As the other two have already said, mainstream media is ignoring it or lying about it, reframing the truth. But it's getting around. But there's still a lot of people that don't know anything about it. And that's one reason why I stand on a street corner holding a sign that says U.S. destroyed Nord Stream pipeline. Of course, not everybody that drives by knows what I'm talking about, but at least I hope that it might clue them in to wonder, or next time they see something about it, they might pay more attention. But I think it's no surprise that Vladimir Putin has made this statement. I think Russia always knew from the very first day who did it. When the Polish member of European Parliament, Sikorski, tweeted it out with a picture of the huge methane bubble, so big the UN says the biggest release of methane in the history of the planet. I wonder where all the so-called progressive environmental groups are that are worried about methane. They haven't said a word, likely because they get money from the Democratic Party. But anyway, so I think Putin's statement, though, will help open the story up even more around the world. And it really confirms for me what Vladimir Putin has said many times, that the United States is an empire of lies.
Bruce, one question, and Regis too. You are both from the U.S. How well known is Seymour Hersh in the U.S. for normal citizens? Because if you follow the alternative media in European countries, I think everybody knows Seymour Hersh. But how is it in the U.S. for normal citizens? Is Seymour Hersh popular there, or well known, or how you would describe him?
Bruce, go ahead and take that.
I would say for people my age, he's very well known because of his stories in the past about the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, about the U.S. intelligence agencies spying on the American people and foreign leaders, and then of course the Iraq story about the prison, what was it, Abu Ghraib, where people were being tortured. So I think for people my age and maybe older, they're very familiar with him. But for a lot of very young people that haven't been around so long, he might not be so well known. But his story is getting sent around a lot. He's been doing, because the mainstream media is ignoring him so much, he's been doing more and more interviews with a lot of very popular alternative media people. And in fact, yesterday I saw a video interview with him on a Chinese station. So I think that alternative media is really spreading the story a lot, which is good.
Yeah, and I would agree, and I don't have anything to add to what Bruce just said about how well known he is in the United States. Certainly, if people of our age, Bruce is just a couple of years younger than I am, but people even younger than us would certainly know of Cy Hersh. Now, that was a huge story for today, and I think, as Costas said, it bears following the reaction from around the world and also from within Russia, because in the minds of many people, this was an act of war. And Russia has been saying that if attacked, and there's no doubt that this was an attack on Russian assets, not on the Russian mainland, but Russian assets. So we'll see how that unfolds. But the really big story from this week has been the summit, the historic summit between President Xi Jinping of China and President Putin of Russia in Moscow this past week. I'm going to do a short quote, read a short quote from Pepe Escobar, who wrote an incredible article about this. But what he said was, and I quote, "This is the first time in arguably 5 centuries that no political leader from the West is setting the global agenda." I'd like your comments on that. And I'll start first now with Bruce. Bruce Gagnon, what were your thoughts? And I know you read this article.
Yeah, I would say the first thing I think of is that the multipolar world is unstoppable. As much as the US and the West, the colonizers for these past 500 years, the colonizers of Africa, of Latin America, of the Middle East, of Asia, they're on the way out, and they're losing badly, and they're getting desperate, and they're doing all kinds of crazy, insane things, like the United Kingdom saying they're going to send depleted uranium shells. But it's unstoppable, and there's nothing they can really do about it. I've been really fascinated in the last few weeks about watching African leaders speak out over and over again. I mean, they basically chased Macron out of Africa the last couple of weeks. So things are really moving quickly. BRICS is growing. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is growing. So these are all really good signs. I just hope and pray that the U.S. and its insane allies don't create a nuclear war. This is my biggest worry right now, that they'll go and use nukes as a last desperate act. If we can't have it, we're going to blow up the world. They're capable of it. So, we need everybody now, all hands on deck to stop this madness.
Okay, I'm going to go to you, Hendrik. And what were your thoughts about the statement by Pepe Escobar, and whether you read it or not? But it really does seem that since 1945, with the Yalta Conference, I'm living in Yalta now, between Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt, that for the first time, as Pepe Escobar says, there are no Western leaders dictating the future order of the world. Hendrik, do you agree with that?
Yes, I think he is probably right. No Western leader was there, and Russia and China will, I don't know, dictate, but they will have a major impact on the world in the next years, decades. I hope so, at least. We are going directly into a multipolar world, and this can be really good. I think, as Bruce said, there are also a lot of dangers on this way. But I think, as I always say, our media in the Western countries or in Scandinavia, and that is always a problem. They don't telling us what is the real impact of this kind of meeting, because this meeting will change the world, and we are not told about how or what they really have discussed, and what kind of impact this will have for the future. So, but Pepe Escobar is right, I think. Yes.
Okay. Costas, your thoughts on whether or not Putin and Xi now are determining, dictating, leading the future order of the world?
Well, clearly, they're showing a new path of multipolarity and multicentric powers around the world, and this is very, very important. And as we previously mentioned in the previous chat we had, Western media is downplaying the visit and the agreements, 14 agreements in all. Even Mr. Biden, President Biden, said that we shouldn't pay too much attention to these agreements. They're not becoming allies, really. I mean, so they're trying to downplay the importance, the historical importance of this visit and the outcome of this visit. I would just like to point out something that probably will not make the news anywhere in the West. A small country in Central America, Honduras, with a left-wing government, Xiomara Castro, a few days ago, during the visit of Xi Jinping, broke off relations with Taiwan. They're not recognizing Taiwan as an independent nation. Only 18 countries around the world have been left over in recognizing Taiwan. And this is a very, very small country in Central America, very close to the United States. So when you have defiance of even small nations on the status and the hegemony that has been put out by the empire since 1945, we mentioned Africa, we mentioned Latin America, I'm just mentioning Honduras, but we'll see a lot more about this in smaller and medium-sized countries, in other regions, in Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, even in Europe. I think in the near future, what is happening in France is shaking the world and Europe itself. So, multipolarity comes out in the West, where the crumbling situation of the empire is, you can see it. I'm not saying it's finished. Far from that. It's very, very strong and very dangerous, as Bruce mentioned, and nuclear war is just around the corner. So there will be a lot of more contradictions coming out, but also a lot of hopes will be coming out also.
Well, thank you for that, Costas. I'm going to keep it right here with you. You mentioned the 14 agreements, and you also mentioned President Biden really downplaying the significance of this. Really, nothing important came out of it, is basically what he said. The 14 agreements, I read them, and they involve billions and billions of dollars in energy, technology, aircraft construction, space research, agriculture, and more areas of cooperation. Costas, what was your takeaway on these amendments as you read them?
Well, I will start with something I want Bruce to talk about, because he's probably the most eloquent and most more about that. Space, peaceful space research. The word peaceful is very important, and space should be put out of the agenda of creating capabilities of war in space and weapons, de-weaponizing space. So this is a very, very important agreement between China and Russia about space. But as you say, the economic impact is the de-dollarization of world economy, of global economy, meaning that there will be more breathing space for national currencies, not only Chinese currency and Russian currency, but other currencies that will join in bilateral, multilateral relationships in commerce and business between them. So the steps which are being put down are steps in the road of peace, not antagonism itself. Antagonism, it's outside the picture, outside the box. But Washington can only see this as antagonism because, as it was mentioned before, this is ours and we're not going to lose it. So when you think you own something, but you don't really own it, the world, Earth, the globe, the natural resources, geoenergy, geoeconomy, this is the big sign that is coming out of these 14 agreements, that the world has to cooperate. The world has to find a language of cooperation for a better standard of living for all peoples around the world, and for natural resources to be in the respecting humanity and for humanity, all of humanity, not only for the 1% who own the resources in the West. So I think this is a very, very important initiative which will not be finished. We have President Lula's visit in China in less than 10, 12 days. There will be important talks. So this will keep on going. The train will not stop. And this is a non-stop voyage for all humanity. We should all get on board and try to help and try to survive as humanity through these steps that have been taken.
All right, we're going to talk about the weapons in space, the weaponization of space, when we finish this conversation on the agreements. And Bruce will have a lot to say about that. Hendrik, your thoughts on these 14 agreements between Russia and China?
Oh, for both countries, these agreements are very important. And everybody who follows the situation will see or could see already that it would be happen. But when I talk around about 1 year ago to one of my family members, then that time they thought that now Russia will go under these sanctions. There will be an economical collapse if we in Germany or in Europe don't import their oil and gas. Now we're seeing this all was rubbish. I heard a number, I don't know if it's really true, but in the end of this year, Russia will deliver gas to China twice as much as they have delivered to the European Union. So both countries are dependent on each other, and they have already this kind of cooperations. Both countries are very good at diplomacy. They always will find a way to cooperate together. And these agreements are, of course, very important for both countries. And as Costas says, they will dictate the future, and there will be a lot of countries. They're looking to the west and to the right and saying, to the left and to the right, and saying, okay, should we really depend on European Union or on the US? Or should we better cooperate with Russia and China? And I think the choice will be very clear for many, many of these countries in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia. So we'll see a major shift in the future. We are living in really interesting times, but also really dangerous times when we see the danger of nuclear war.
Wow. You know, one of the things that we will talk about going forward, and I think what you're saying is many countries now are asserting their sovereignty, their independence, which they've been deprived of because of American, British, French, European colonialism. And I think this is something that both Xi and Putin are affirming. Strict observance of international law, the principles of the UN Charter, and the respect for the sovereignty, dignity, and rights of every country, no matter how large or how small. All right, Bruce, your thoughts now on these agreements.
Well, they're very important, obviously. But the thing that stands out for me, something related to what you were just saying, is that nations, weaker nations, smaller nations that have been under the thumb of the West for so long, they've been dying for somebody to stand up to the US, somebody that was big enough and strong enough. And now we have this unity between Russia and China and Iran and other countries that are now doing that. And this just opens it all up. It's like opening the window on a beautiful spring day, and a breath of fresh air comes in, and people now feel empowered. They feel empowered to stand up, to speak out, like the example of Honduras a moment ago, really perfect example. They felt empowered. They couldn't have done that a few years ago, right? Because they were just, the US did a regime change operation in Honduras not that long ago, and they're now threatening to do another one as a result of this. Don't you dare step out of line. That's the message from Washington and Berlin and Brussels and Paris and London. So, I think people in the global South now say, hey, we don't have to play the game anymore. We can go, we can choose sides, we can stand up. And this is really a wonderful step for the world.
Yeah. And I think these other countries, smaller countries and not so small countries, are realizing they can benefit from this prosperity, from this vision of a multipolar world, a win-win philosophy, and not a zero-sum game where only America wins. They're all beginning to realize, as you're all saying, is this is a bright new future and a very hopeful future. Bruce, I'm going to keep it right there with you because the next subject is about nuclear deployment. They both came out and they said, we cannot allow proliferation of nuclear weapons. They both come out and in their declaration, they said no deployment of nukes outside a country's own territory. And they're demanding the withdrawal of all nukes deployed abroad, speaking specifically to the United States. Bruce, you've been following this issue of nuclear weapons. In the next segment, we'll talk about weapons and nuclear power in space. But what was your reaction when you read this statement by these two world leaders about nuclear weapons?
Well, it is something that I'm worried about and concerned about, and I have been for a long time. The U.S. has nuclear weapons today that are loaded on aircraft that are stationed in Turkey, Italy, Germany, I think the Netherlands, and now soon going into the United Kingdom at Lakenheath. And I know that Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament in England is organizing protests against the Lakenheath deployment now. So, what do you expect when you're surrounding Russia with NATO expansion, when you're holding war games, when you're deploying so-called missile defense systems in Romania and Poland that are the shield to be used after a U.S. first strike attack is launched against Russia and China, something that the U.S. Space Command has been wargaming for more than 20 years. I've seen the reports on them many times. And in the case of these deployments in Romania and Poland, these Aegis, they're called Aegis ashore. The Aegis interceptor missiles are on ships, Navy ships that are surrounding Russia and China. But because they've had a decent testing rate, they put them on land too now in these two countries near the Russian borders. But not only can they launch these interceptor missiles, the shield, to take out a Russian or Chinese retaliatory capability after a U.S. first strike, but they also, with the turn of a switch, can launch first strike attack nuclear capable Tomahawk cruise missiles that can help the U.S. evade radar detection because they fly low and hit Russia in a very short period of time. Well, this is a Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. So don't you expect that at some point Russia has to respond in some way? And the announcement today that Russia is going to deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus indicates to me that they are indeed responding. This is all just further danger for all of us.
All right, we'll go to Hendrik. What were your thoughts on this? And I think your country now has been or will be hosting American bases and weapons and possibly missiles. So what are your thoughts on this statement about non-proliferation and removing all nukes from foreign lands?
Normally, this is very easy, which we should sign under and give applause for this. Of course, that's the best idea ever when it comes to the nuclear questions and station of weapons. Everybody should take out these nuclear weapons from other countries, and it's of course the US who has atomic bombs and nuclear weapons in Germany and other countries, and Norway could be a country who is very interested for the US to station nuclear warheads here. I don't want it. In our organization, People Diplomacy Norway, we have several members who are also members of Doctors Against Nuclear Weapons. So this idea is a really good idea, but of course, I don't think that government of Norway or that the government of the US will sign under this kind of agreement.
All right. Costas, we're going to go to you for your thoughts on this.
Well, yesterday, 25th of March, was the 202 years of the anniversary of the Greek Revolution against the Ottoman Empire, when Greece became an independent country. And during the military parade and the parades we had in many cities and towns in the morning, a lot of youth came out with pamphlets, students, young people mostly, but also people from our generation, simply saying in their pamphlets and their leaflets and yelling that independence is not here yet. How can we be independent when we have 12 military bases from the United States and NATO in Greece today? And these bases like Suda in Crete and Alexandroupolis in the north, very close to Yalta, very close to Crimea, operating drones and Navy ships and providing military equipment on a vertical basis to Ukraine and the Baltic countries from the port of Alexandroupolis. So you have a nation, an empire with 734 military bases around the world. And this country is telling, through the media they control, and the oligarchs that control the media in the West, and the bankers and the television station owners and the media owners, that Russia and China are a danger. Now, let us put on a balance how many bases outside these countries exist, both in China and the United States, not more than 4 or 5. And we have 734 since 1945 in all continents. So, math is truth here, and it's very, very easy to understand. So I do believe that the big question and the big answer that we need to have today, an important answer, is that people have to come out around the world and struggle for peace and nuclear disarmament and nuclear deproliferation and the control again of nuclear weapons. We have no standing agreements now to control nuclear weapons on any nuclear countries. There's complete dismantling of any global agreements to control nuclear weapons, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, or the constant increase of armaments. The German economy has completely changed, and it will be completely different in the next few years, with hundreds of billions of euros being spent on a war economy. You will not have now any more refrigerators or cars from Germany or appliances flooding in every continent and country. You will have tanks, planes, arms. This is what the United States empire wants in Europe: a new armament, a new arms race, and perhaps what they call controlled peripheral wars, which is impossible, because wars is different to play it on a computer in a game, and it's different when it's real, and you cannot control it, and it can get out of control very, very easily, like it's happening now with the depleted uranium shells that are going to be exported from Great Britain to Ukraine, and the answering from Russia, which is a logical answer, that I'm going to deploy nuclear weapons. And what is going to be the next answer, or the next tactical, strategical advance from NATO and the Washington in Europe and Eastern Europe? So this will not end easily. It's a very difficult game, and it's a lose-lose game for humanity. There are no winners in a nuclear war. So the people have to come out, organizations, nations, peoples, countries. Like Hendrik mentioned, the Doctors in Norway Against Nuclear War. We have students' unions here against the North American bases in Greece, where land, sea, and air is completely controlled by NATO and Washington. So this has to end, and there's no other way out. We have to provide solutions for these problems, which are very acute, and they have a time limit. They're not, problems that can be solved in the next decades or so. We don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, the nuclear threat is the number one existential real threat to life on the planet. And I'm reminded of the Helsinki summit between Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan in 1990 in Helsinki, when after hours of discussion and negotiations, Gorbachev said, let's get rid of all nuclear weapons. To which Reagan replied, I've committed myself to this space defense, these missile defense systems, Star Wars, and I told the American people that I would not offer that up. And he walked away from Helsinki, missing the chance. And Secretary James Baker, his Secretary of State, said this, missing the chance once and for all to rid the world of this nuclear terror. Now, that's some 30 years ago. What a shame that it has only intensified since that time. All right, I want to move on. I'm going to start with Bruce, because this is Bruce's really life mission for the last 30 some years. He's the founder, co-founder, and coordinator of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. 30 years ago, Bruce, one of the things that Putin and Xi came out with was, and I summarize, no military superiority in outer space. Bruce, your turn.
Well, that's nothing new on the part of Russia and China. They've been going to the UN General Assembly, I'd say for at least 25 years or more, annually introducing a resolution to ban all weapons in space. We need a new treaty. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 bans weapons of mass destruction in space. Excuse me. But at the Space Command, they talk about, weapons of selective destruction fall outside of that treaty, so we can go forward with our plans to militarize space, weaponize space. And so Russia's been saying, well, let's close the door to the barn before the horse gets out. Let's create a new treaty. And so every year at the General Assembly, they take a vote, and the whole world votes in favor of a new treaty except for US and Israel. Then they send it to the Permanent Conference on Disarmament in Geneva for negotiation, and it is there that the US and Israel block the development of this treaty. So this is the official line of the US. Why? Because the United States wants to control space, and they want to control the pathway on and off the planet, because they want to be able to ensure that their corporate interests can go out and mine the sky in the years ahead. They want to have nuclear powered mining colonies on the moon and Mars, on asteroids and other planetary bodies. They want to build nuclear rockets to Mars with nuclear reactors for engines, cutting in half the amount of time it takes to get there. And they want to control the orbits around the planet. There are limited parking spaces in these orbits. Let's just take lower Earth orbit, LEO, as an example. Right now, the US, with its allies in the corporate world like SpaceX, are loading up by the thousands, filling up the parking spaces around the Earth in lower Earth orbit with the Starlink satellites, which they are using to give the Ukrainian army, for example, targeting information of the Donbass civilian homes and water systems and other such things, and also for attacks against Russian troop formations in the Donbass, who are there trying to protect the people against the Nazis who've been killing them for the last 8 years. But this orbit around low Earth orbit is becoming increasingly congested, and people fear that the Kessler syndrome is going to kick in. And that's a situation where you have a cascading collision because of these increasingly crowded orbits that becomes just unstoppable. And soon, guess what happens? Life on the Earth largely goes black because all connections to cell phones and internet banking and cable TV and air traffic control and virtually everything else we do on the Earth is hooked up now to these satellites. So China, though, is saying we can't let the United States fill up this lower Earth orbit because then they'll have an advantage to see, to hear, and to target everybody on Earth, because that's all warfare these days is coordinated by space technology. So China is now saying they're going to launch 13,000 satellites into lower Earth orbit in the coming years. So it's just like the nuclear race is expanding on the planet below. We're now seeing this race to take control of space for military operations, for military advantage. So we have a dual crisis on our hands. Unfortunately, most people don't know about the space one as much as they know about the nuclear one on Earth. I urge people to check out our website, which is spaceforpeace.org, spaceforpeace.org.
Thank you for that, Bruce. And I want to say that I don't think there's any other information source that I know of that is as thorough as the Global Network website, spaceforpeace.org. I'll put it in the description. But Bruce has been covering this story for 30 years, more than 30 years. And the thought that I've had for the last few years, and since I've learned so much from Bruce, is there's the existential threat of nuclear war on the planet. But when you think about it, a war in space, as Bruce was saying, could not only turn the entire world dark, which would leave us in primitive conditions, which I think would create incredible chaos and violence in the attempt to be able to survive and not to starve to death. It's a terrible, terrible thought to consider. So let's go now to Hendrik. Your thoughts on this military superiority in space that the United States is obviously full steam ahead on.
I visited the website of Bruce, and I didn't know so much about it, but Bruce did a very great work with his fellows. So I only can recommend to visit this website because this is a topic we are not hearing anything about. But of course, it's the chaos would appear when this happened is not imaginable. I think it takes 2 weeks, and then we are back in the Stone Age. When it comes to all these satellites in the space, the U.S. satellites, then China has already done a step. That's what our newspapers are telling, because they have these weather balloons over the United States. And so we are fed with all these kind of stories. But as I say, I didn't know so much about it before, or didn't thought so much about it before. But space, of course, it's a very important part. And this idea from China and Russia not put any weapons there is, of course, very important.
Can I interrupt just for a minute to say that in northern Norway, near the Russian border, there's a very important U.S. ground station that talks to the satellites, and it's part of this U.S. first strike attack program. So I urge you to check that out and help people in Norway know that if there is a war in space, Norway is going to be very much a part of helping to direct it from this particular station.
You're right.
one of the things that I've learned from Bruce, and we documented that in my first feature film, The Ghost of Jeju. There's a section in there where Bruce is interviewed and introduces, for me, was the first time, the United States doctrine or plan for full spectrum dominance of the planet and space, on Earth, in the air, on the seas, and in space. And the United States under Donald Trump created the Space Command to make sure that the United States, as Bruce said, could not only control the pathway to space, but to control all of future activities on the space, travel to other planets, and mining minerals on the moon, on Mars, and on asteroids. And so but people need to understand that this is a very evil, demonic, satanic plan by some people to completely subjugate the rest of the world in order to increase profit and greed and power. Costas, I want to come to you on this military superiority in space. And how do you see it from Greece with all those American bases there?
Well, people are very, very scared here about the existence and the upgrading of American bases. It's not a question of just having them, but they're being completely and constantly being upgraded with housing submarines under the sea and many, many ports, drone facilities in more than 7 American bases in central Greece and northern Greece and Crete, close to North Africa, to the Middle East, to the Arab world, and so on. But if you just permit me to make, just to state an example of what happened 500 years ago when there was an uncharted, unexplored part of the globe. Let's imagine that space today is another continent outside of Earth, or many, many continents together, which are unexplored. 500 years ago, when they discovered the New World, the Americas, we know what happened. The destruction of civilizations, genocide, the natives' populations were completely annihilated. They exported slavery from Africa, destroying other civilizations in Africa. So what will happen if they discovered a new continent outside the Earth? We have seen it. They will do it again. And they have done it before. Empires are not the answer. Empires are evil in their DNA, and the way they act, the way they create strategies, and the way to make profits. And they don't care about human lives or lives at all, anything that lives or anything that breathes. So actually what is happening, and what Bruce described very, very eloquently, and I suggest that people do visit the website, and not only visit it, but gather information which will be very, very useful to their struggles. We have given this website to a lot of student unions and even trade unions, to English-speaking people here to follow, because space antagonism and space weaponizing is already here. It's happening. And it will not have a good end. We've seen it before 500 years ago. Look at the melting of the ice in the North Pole, the Arctic Club they have created, and how that is going to be a new territory of dispute between the empires against Russia, against China, against other nations that want to collaborate on these regions for all of humanity. I remember a few months ago when a Russian scientist called for world collaboration of scientists, because as the defreezing of the ice takes place, there will be new bacteria that have been out of this world for millions of years, and this bacteria will be coming out, and we don't know what the effect will be, if it will be dangerous or not. So they called on the scientific community around the world, even in the UN, for people to collaborate in the scientific community and protect humanity and life on this planet. We need more of these examples to take place, and less examples of war economy. War economy is the end of humanity, and we have to stop it.
Yeah,
but we're always coming back to the topic, when the citizens in our Western countries, and I mean NATO countries, don't know anything about it, and Russia and China is the empire of evil, then of course we have the moral, we have the democracy, and then it's better we control the space as they would control the space. So we are missing information about Russia and China. And of course, we have to have this independency in our European countries to make the step towards a cooperation that would be easy possible, but we are don't doing it, and the people that we are not enough to gathering on the street because people are not informed. Our mainstream media are telling nothing about that, and if they are telling only that Russia is evil, China is dangerous, so it's better we control the nuclear weapons and we control the space and we control the rest of the world. That is one of our biggest problem, I think.
Well, coming back to that, if you just permit me for a minute, controlling minds, controlling knowledge, distorting knowledge is part of the empire strategy. That's how it starts. So, you made a very, very strong point, Hendrik, and Reggie has said it many, many times, and Bruce mentioned it before. Alternative media is the answer. And multiplying alternative media means liberating minds, liberating citizens, and letting them breathe. Humanity needs to breathe.
Yeah. At times, this challenge of getting the word out, the truth out, seems overwhelming and seems sometimes impossible. But I know, because I know each of you personally, Costas, Hendrik, and Bruce, you have been doing your part to try to get the truth out, not only about Russia, Crimea, but everything that's happening in the world. And I think that's why this collaboration between the four of us, the Friends of Crimea, Friends of Russia, and this particular show is really important, because I know from the responses I get from people that people are listening, and they ask me, can we share this? And I say, absolutely. It's critical importance to share this. And I want to underscore this point. What is so important about hearing from people like you, Costas, Hendrik, and Bruce, you are not politicians with expensive suits, ties, and shoes. You are real people. Other people can relate to you. They know that you're not plastic. They know that you're not reading a script that was prepared for them by the CIA or whoever. And so I think this effort that we're doing together and what you've been doing individually is so important. And people have to be encouraged not to give up and not to stop.
Before we close, can I say one last thing?
We're not close to closing yet.
Oh, okay. But anyway, let me just say something here.
Go ahead.
Last night, I went to your hometown, Waterville, Maine, to a theater where 20 people came to watch a film called Ithaca. And it's a story about Julian Assange and his father and his brother. His father and his brother from Australia have created this film telling the story about Julian and his being mired in prison, really facing death. And it was very moving. And the father and the brother were at the theater. They're on a 59-city tour right now of the United States.
Wow.
And so little Waterville, your hometown, where you were a big hockey star growing up, they had this film. And I just want to, because I was so moved by the experience, and his father is just a remarkable human being. I mean, oh my God. Anyway, I just want to remind people about Julian Assange. I wrote a blog about it, and I told a story, if I could just very briefly tell it. In 1989, NASA did a space launch called Galileo. And Galileo carried on board plutonium-238, the most toxic substance ever created by human beings. And I organized a campaign in Florida, I lived there at the time, to block the launch. And we went there the day it was before it was supposed to be launched, and protest news conference. And the next day it was delayed, and it was delayed for a week. And so we went back every day, because the media is there from all over the world. They had nothing to do because of the delay. So we would hold another press conference. We got a lot of media. And finally they launched it. Well, some years later, my son, whose name is also Julian, by the way, he's a debate coach. He was doing some research, and he discovered a book written by Julian Assange and a woman that he was working with. And in that, he told the story how his first hacking operation ever was to hack into the NASA computers with what he called the wank worm. And they shut that launch down for a week. Absolutely amazing story.
Yeah, and what's also so important about Julian Assange, we are Julian. Julian is us. What's happened to him is now beginning to happen to all of us. If we're not thrown in prison, we're censored, we're blocked. Sanctions are put on our ability to get on certain social media. And so this is so important that we not forget Julian, and that we realize that we're fighting the same evil that he is being punished for now in prison because he exposed the truth. Costas, I'm going to go to you now with the next topic for our program tonight. China publicized, before coming to Moscow last week, their 12-point peace plan. It was rejected out of hand by the United States and, of course, Zelensky. There will be no ceasefire, no negotiations, period. Costas, your thoughts on the peace plan and Russia's very diplomatic response to it?
Well, just let me mention that Ithaca was shown here in Greece also, that Julian Assange film. His wife was here for 3 days, and it was in the theater packed with 300 people. And it's amazing how small this world is, because Free Assange is a global campaign, and we have to help as much as possible to push for that campaign and make more people aware of that. Now, for the peace plan you mentioned about China. Now, this peace plan, it was put on the side by Washington within 24 hours. I mean, I don't know if they even read it twice. You know, usually when you get a report or you get an agreement to sign, you have lawyers, you have teams, you have people who assess, people who look under the lines, behind the words, under the words, above the words. I don't think they even do that. They did that. They just read the title. Maybe they read it very quickly and they threw it in the garbage can. Why? Because this peace plan talks about things that are still ambiguous. We have the United Nations Charter on the question of protecting countries and borders. Now, China does mention that within its peace plan. And if the United States and the West wanted to play a game against Russia, they would have separated this point from the peace plan and say, oh, here we have something that China says that we like. It's talking about invading another country. But what China does is that connects every point in these 12 points, putting them in a bowl and saying, look, we have to sit down and talk. Now, the charter in the United Nations is very clear, but the way it interprets the question of protecting a country's borders is something that I'm sure the Chinese knew about it before they even wrote it, how they're going to be talking about it and researching this on a table around a diplomatic solution that has to be found. So the ambiguity is from the West, it's not from the East. Within Ukraine, you had a genocidal war going on for 8 years, since 2015, against the Russians and the Russian-speaking population in central Ukraine and eastern Ukraine, and not only against the Russians, but against at least other 8 minorities within Ukraine. So if you're going to talk about the UN Charter, you have to open up the whole book, not just isolate a couple of words and play on that, because this is done by politicians every day, isolating a word or an idea and making out whatever I want with it. Now, that is why this proposal is very, very important, and has to be stated again and again as a possibility for a dialogue within the diplomatic channels that have to be open and have to remain open if they're not open still. But you look at Zelensky. Zelensky is playing the game of getting this. This is a corrupt regime. It's not just an extreme nationalist neo-Nazi regime. It's also a very corrupt regime. Let us, our public, know that more than 7 governors and hundreds of civil employees in the upper layer of bureaucracy in Ukraine have been detained, or they have left the country with millions of dollars in their suitcases, of the corruption that is going on within that country. And this is not put out in the West in any news outlets in the mainstream media. But even if you look even in the Ukrainian news, this is put out. You know, his head as chief left for Israel, asking for asylum. Other people have gone to Austria. They're stealing money. All this money being poured in from the West and the European Union and Washington and other Western countries, and black market sales of weapons outside of Ukraine. The picture is immense, and this book has to be opened up. So if you're going to talk about a peace plan, like China said, this peace plan will not only reveal what has really happened in Ukraine in the last 8 years, but it will reveal what is happening now. That is why they don't want to talk about peace, because they have to talk about what they did yesterday, the day before yesterday, how they blew up the agreement in Minsk, and the Minsk agreement was dead, a few hours after it was signed, and it was sabotaged in the worst way it could have been. So there is a question of trust from Russia and China and the East and Belarus itself, because they want to make it part of a problem. The West wants to make Belarus a part of this problem. Like Poland is one of the most fierce countries with extreme nationalist strategies against Russia. And you have Italy with Mrs. Meloni asking for nuclear weapons to be installed as soon as possible in Ukraine. That is why Putin came out yesterday, saying that if the West is contemplating to use neo-Nazi regimes like they did in the 30s with Italy and Germany, and they want to do it again today, they want to do it in Europe, this is a real danger for Europe, not only for Russia, but for Europe and European peoples. We have had 2 world wars, a war within Europe that destroyed Yugoslavia, an ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and other peripheral wars in North Africa and the Middle East and so on. So these wars are being imported and exported out of Europe. What is the European Union leadership going to do? Are they going to be still following as junior partners, destroying their own continent and their own nations and their own economies like they're doing it in France today? And the French people are out in the streets, not because only of the question of retirement ages. This is just the fuse that lit up the whole problem in France, with racism and neo-Nazism and separation of people and ghettos and the clochard, 20,000 people in Paris living in sewages. They're coming out to breathe for the first time in years, like if they did not exist. And this is happening in France today, a so-called Western modern nation.
Wow, thank you for that, Costas. Hendrik, I'm going to send it over to you for your thoughts on the peace plan.
These points are, of course, very important and very interesting. I just opened the website from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China only to have these points here one more time. But also there we have the same problem. Our media has to tell us what does it means and what the different points are. I have already heard here in Norway from some left politicians that point number 1, respecting the sovereignty of all countries. Oh yeah, they say that is very good. That means that Russia has to take out all the troops, also included from Crimea and Ukraine, and then we are in a good situation. But it's not so easy. they think it is. And also here we have to have this media researchers and real analysts to tell us what does it means, because it's not only to read it and then you know how to create peace in Ukraine. It's also not only about Ukraine; it's about the whole future of the world, and so these points are very interesting, and we should talk about it, and we should inform people about it. That's my thoughts in short terms.
Okay, thank you, Hendrik. Bruce, I'm going to throw it over to you for your thoughts.
Well, I think the reason why the United States and much of the West doesn't want to agree to any peace treaty is because they have an agenda, and their agenda is to break Russia up into smaller countries because they want control of Russia's vast resource base. They want to balkanize Russia. They want to do to it what they did to Yugoslavia when Bill Clinton was president. On the day that the special military operation began, February of last year, on that very same day, the US and NATO began a war game called Cold Response right on the Norway-Russia border. And since that time, they've been working on another war game in that same region that they're planning to begin very soon. So they want to militarize the Arctic. They want to control the Arctic. Our senator from Maine, so-called independent Angus King in the US Senate, is one of the leaders in this whole project to have the US take control of the Arctic. So this is extremely dangerous. And when if you just search on the internet, the wars waged against Russia over the years, what you find is virtually every 100 years, European countries have invaded Russia. Sweden, France, of course, Germany, and etc. So this is a long, ongoing project. And they know that if they want to have continued prosperity for their elites in their country, for their oligarchs, they must take down Russia. And that's why they don't want to give up.
Thank you all for sharing these insights. They're very, very valuable. I think my only hope is that what we're seeing in terms of the United States national debt above $30 trillion, they've spent over $100 billion in Ukraine. It was just announced and published in the news the failure of several banks in the United States. The bank in Silicon Valley. The United States is in very, very deep trouble economically. The government doesn't really know how to handle this. And as Costas said, with all these military bases scattered all over the planet, the cost to maintain these is not sustainable. And while all of this is happening, as Bruce and I well know, the United States infrastructure is crumbling. The social safety net has all but disappeared. The social fabric of the country has been torn to shreds. What we're looking at is an empire in collapse. It reminds me, the emperor has no clothes, but he's still dangerous. I want to thank all three of you for this really incredible discussion tonight that I hope gets out to a lot more people. And so we'll see you again next week. I hope we can do this on an almost regular basis, given Easter, or given business or whatever it is. But this will become a regular feature now on Dateline. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you and goodbye.